The scream that tore through the valley at dusk belonged to Catherine Grace, and it would haunt Warren Cole's memory for the rest of his days, though not in the way one might expect. Catherine had been collecting herbs along the ridge above the Niobrara River when she first heard the howling. The Nebraska sky had turned the color of burnt copper, and shadows stretched long across the grasslands surrounding Valentine. She had lived in this territory for 6 months now, working as a schoolteacher in the small frontier town, and she knew the sounds of the wilderness well enough to recognize danger. But she had never heard wolves sound quite like this, hungry and desperate, their voices rising in a chorus that made her blood run cold. She dropped her basket and ran. The pack emerged from the cottonwoods below, 7 gray shapes moving with terrible purpose. Catherine's boots pounded against the hard earth as she sprinted toward the river, her skirts clutched in her fists. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. The wolves were gaining, their snarls growing louder closer. She could hear their paws striking the ground, could feel their breath on the evening air. The river loomed ahead, its waters dark and swift. Catherine did not hesitate. She plunged into the current just as the lead wolf snapped at her heels, its teeth catching nothing but the hem of her dress. The cold water hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, dragging at her heavy skirts. She pushed deeper, fighting the current, knowing the wolves would not follow into water this deep. She was wrong. The pack leader entered the water first, then another, then 2 more. They swam after her with single-minded determination, their eyes reflecting the dying light. Catherine tried to scream, but water filled her mouth. She was tiring, the current pulling her downstream, her waterlogged dress becoming a death sentence. Then the first shot rang out. The sound cracked across the valley like thunder, and the lead wolf jerked backward in the water, blood blooming dark against the current. A second shot followed, then a third and fourth in rapid succession. Catherine's vision blurred as she struggled to keep her head above water, but she saw a figure on the riverbank, saw the muzzle flash of his rifle, heard each precise shot as it found its mark. The wolves fell one by one, some in the water, others as they tried to retreat to the bank. The cowboy did not stop until every last wolf lay still. Catherine felt strong hands grip her arms and haul her toward the shore. She had no strength left to help, could only gasp and choke as the man dragged her from the river and onto solid ground. She collapsed on the bank, coughing water from her lungs, her entire body shaking with cold and shock. "Easy now," a deep voice said. "You're safe. I've got you." Catherine looked up through wet strands of hair and saw a man kneeling beside her, his face partially shadowed by his hat. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 22 years, with strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hands were gentle as he helped her sit up, though she could see the rifle still slung across his back, smoke still rising from its barrel. "Can you breathe?" he asked, his voice steady despite the violence that had just unfolded. Catherine nodded, still coughing. "I think so. I thought I was going to die. Not on my watch." He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Name's Warren Cole. I've got a camp about half a mile from here. We need to get you warm and dry before you catch your death." "Catherine Grace," she managed through chattering teeth. "The schoolteacher in Valentine." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I've heard about you. The teacher who came all the way from Missouri to educate our young ones." He glanced at the dead wolves scattered along the riverbank. "What brought you out here alone at dusk?" "Herbs for the school children. One of them has a terrible cough, and I thought I might make a remedy." The words sounded foolish now, reckless. "I did not realize how late it had gotten." Warren stood and offered his hand. "We'll collect what's left of your basket tomorrow in daylight. Right now, we need to move." Catherine took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her, and Warren steadied her with an arm around her waist. She should have felt embarrassed by the intimacy of his touch, by her bedraggled appearance, but she was too cold and exhausted to care about propriety. They walked slowly through the gathering darkness, Warren supporting most of her weight. His camp appeared through the trees, a small fire burning between bedrolls and supplies. A beautiful paint horse lifted its head as they approached, nickering softly. "That's Juniper," Warren said, guiding Catherine to sit near the fire. "Best horse in 3 counties, though don't tell her I said so. She'll get a swelled head." Despite everything, Catherine found herself smiling. Warren moved with efficient purpose, building up the fire until it blazed bright and warm. He produced a blanket from his pack and handed it to her. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "There's a spare shirt in my saddlebag. It'll be too big, but it's dry." Catherine's hands shook as she fumbled with the buttons of her dress. Everything was soaked through, and the fabric clung to her skin stubbornly. She finally managed to strip down to her undergarments and pull on Warren's shirt, which fell nearly to her knees. She wrapped the blanket around herself and cleared her throat. "I'm decent." Warren turned back around, feeding more wood to the fire. In the flickering light, Catherine could see him more clearly now. He had dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. There was a kindness in his face that contrasted with the lethal efficiency she had witnessed at the river. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life." "Those wolves were acting strange," Warren said, settling himself on the opposite side of the fire. "Too aggressive, too willing to follow you into deep water. I've been tracking that pack for 3 days. They killed 2 calves from a ranch north of here, and the rancher hired me to deal with them." "You're a hunter," among other things. "I work cattle mostly, but I take jobs where I can find them." He pulled out a small pot and began preparing coffee. "A man has to eat." Catherine watched him work, noticed the practiced ease of his movements, the way his hands remained steady despite what he had just done. "Have you lived in Valentine long?" "Born here, actually. Left for a few years to work ranches down in Texas and Kansas, but I came back last spring when my father passed. He had a small homestead about 10 miles east of town." Warren's expression grew distant. "Not much to it, but it's mine now. I've been trying to build it into something worthwhile. I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you. He was a good man." Warren poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one across the fire to Catherine. "What about you? What brings a young woman from Missouri all the way out to Nebraska territory?" Catherine wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for its heat. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago. I had an aunt in St. Louis who took me in, but she passed last year. I saw an advertisement seeking a teacher for Valentine, and I thought perhaps a fresh start would do me good." I had nothing holding me in Missouri anymore. Understanding passed between them, 2 souls who had known loss and chosen to keep moving forward. "How are you finding Valentine?" Warren asked. "It's different from what I expected," Catherine admitted. "Smaller, harder. But the people have been welcoming, and the children are eager to learn. I have 12 students ranging from 5 to 14 years old. We meet in the church since there's no proper schoolhouse yet. I heard the town council was talking about building one. They've been talking about it since I arrived. I'll believe it when I see the first board laid." Catherine sipped her coffee, feeling warmth finally beginning to return to her bones. "Where were you headed when you found me?" "I was tracking the wolves back to their den. They had to be stopped before they killed again." Warren stared into the fire. "I heard you scream and ran toward the sound. When I reached the ridge and saw you in the water with that pack swimming after you, I don't think I've ever moved faster in my life." The intensity in his voice made Catherine's breath catch. She looked at him across the dancing flames and felt something shift in her chest, a awareness she had not expected. This man had killed 7 wolves without hesitation to save her life. He had given her his jacket and his shirt, had built up his fire to keep her warm, and now sat watching over her with those steady gray eyes as if there was nowhere else in the world he would rather be. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," she said softly. Warren met her gaze. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Grace. Any decent man would have done the same." "I don't think that's true, and please call me Catherine. Catherine." The way he said her name, careful and warm, sent a flutter through her stomach. "You should try to rest. I'll keep watch and make sure nothing else comes sniffing around our camp. Come morning, I'll take you back to Valentine." Catherine wanted to protest that she was fine, that she did not need watching over, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. The events of the evening had drained her completely. She lay down near the fire, pulling the blanket tight around herself, and closed her eyes. She did not expect to sleep, but darkness claimed her almost immediately. When Catherine woke, the sun was already climbing the sky, painting the Nebraska grasslands in shades of gold. She sat up quickly, disoriented, and found Warren crouched by the fire preparing breakfast. He looked up and smiled, and Catherine felt her heart skip. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore and stiff, but alive thanks to you." Catherine pushed hair from her face and realized it had dried in tangled waves during the night. She must look a fright. "What time is it?" "Past 7. I let you sleep. You needed it." Warren handed her a tin plate with bacon and beans. "It's not fancy, but it'll give you strength for the ride back." Catherine accepted the plate gratefully, suddenly ravenous. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning air fresh and cool. Catherine found herself stealing glances at Warren, taking in details she had missed in the darkness. The way his shoulders filled his shirt, the calluses on his hands, the small scar above his left eyebrow. He was handsome in a rough, honest way that made her pulse quicken. After they finished eating, Warren saddled Juniper while Catherine reluctantly pulled her dress back on. It was still damp and uncomfortable, but she could not ride back to town wearing only a man's shirt, no matter how practical it might be. Warren boosted her onto Juniper's back and swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. "Hold on," he said near her ear, and Catherine felt heat flood her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. They rode slowly back toward Valentine, following the river upstream. Warren stopped once to retrieve Catherine's basket, which had scattered herbs across the ground. He dismounted and collected what he could find, handling the plants with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "My mother taught me about herbs before she died," he explained, seeing Catherine's curious expression. "She said a man should know how to heal as well as how to survive." Catherine's admiration for this man grew with every passing moment. As they neared Valentine, Catherine felt a strange reluctance building in her chest. The town appeared on the horizon, its handful of buildings clustered along the main street, smoke rising from morning fires. She did not want this ride to end. She did not want to say goodbye to Warren Cole and return to her ordinary life as if nothing had changed, when everything felt different now. Warren seemed to sense her mood. He slowed Juniper to a walk as they entered the town's outskirts. "Catherine," he said, his voice low, "would it be proper if I called on you sometime? I know you're the school teacher and there are expectations, but I'd like to see you again, if you're willing." Joy bloomed in Catherine's chest. "I would like that very much." They rode down Valentine's Main Street, drawing curious stares from early risers. Warren stopped in front of the boarding house where Catherine rented a small room from Mrs. Eleanor Foster, a widow who ran the establishment with firm kindness. Mrs. Foster emerged onto the porch, her eyes widening as she took in Catherine's disheveled appearance and the cowboy who held her on his horse. "Good heavens, Miss Grace. What happened?" Warren helped Catherine dismount, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Miss Grace had a run-in with wolves last evening, madam. She's unharmed but had quite a scare." "Wolves?" Mrs. Foster bustled down the steps and ushered Catherine toward the house. "You poor dear. Come inside immediately. You need a hot bath and proper clothes." Catherine looked back at Warren, not wanting to go, not ready to leave him. He touched the brim of his hat, his gray eyes warm. "I'll come by tomorrow afternoon if that suits you," he said. "Tomorrow," Catherine agreed, and let Mrs. Foster pull her inside. The next 24 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Catherine endured Mrs. Foster's fussing, a hot bath, and a lecture about the dangers of wandering alone. She taught her students that afternoon, distracted and restless, her mind returning again and again to gray eyes and strong hands, and a deep voice saying her name. The children noticed her preoccupation, and young Emma Parker asked if she was feeling ill. "I'm perfectly well," Catherine assured her, but that was not quite true. She felt fevered with anticipation, sick with hope. Warren arrived the next afternoon precisely at 2 o'clock, riding Juniper and leading a pretty sorrel mare. He had cleaned up, his face freshly shaved, his clothes neat. He tied both horses to the hitching post and climbed the boarding house steps with his hat in his hands. Mrs. Foster opened the door before he could knock. She gave Warren a long, appraising look, taking in his respectful posture and clear eyes. "Mr. Cole, I presume?" "Yes, madam." "I'm here to call on Miss Grace if she's receiving visitors." "She is." Mrs. Foster stepped aside. "You may sit in the parlor, I'll fetch her. And Mr. Cole, I'll be in the next room doing my mending, so mind your manners." "Yes, madam." Catherine appeared moments later wearing a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Warren stood as she entered, and the smile that broke across his face made her heart soar. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Catherine sat in one of the parlor chairs, and Warren took the seat across from her, close enough to talk quietly but proper enough to satisfy Mrs. Foster's watchful presence. "How was your day?" "Long," Warren admitted. "I couldn't stop thinking about whether you'd actually want to see me again or if you were just being polite." "I meant what I said." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Warren, what happened by that river, it changed something for me. I know we've only just met, but I feel as though I've known you much longer." Relief and pleasure washed across Warren's features. "I feel the same way. Catherine, I'm not a rich man. I work hard and I'm trying to build something on my father's land, but it's slow going. I can't offer you luxuries or an easy life." "I don't want luxuries," Catherine interrupted. "I want honesty and kindness and someone who looks at me the way you're looking at me right now." Warren reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "Then I'd like to court you properly if you'll have me." "Yes," Catherine breathed. "Yes, I will." They talked for hours that afternoon, sharing stories and dreams. Warren told her about his plans for his homestead, how he wanted to build a proper house and raise cattle and horses. Catherine told him about her love of teaching, how she hoped to make a real difference in the lives of her students. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and hated cold porridge, and had read the same dime novels as children. Mrs. Foster brought tea and cookies at one point, and Catherine caught the approval in the older woman's eyes. That approval mattered in a small town like Valentine, and Catherine was grateful for it. Warren returned the next day, and the day after that. Within a week, it was understood throughout Valentine that the schoolteacher and the cowboy were courting. Catherine heard whispers at the general store and saw knowing smiles from her students' parents, but she did not care. She was falling in love, tumbling headlong into feelings so intense they frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Warren was unlike any man she had ever known. He was steady and patient, with a quiet strength that never needed to prove itself. He made her laugh with dry observations about town gossip, and impressed her with his knowledge of everything from horse breeding to constellation navigation. When he kissed her for the first time, 3 weeks into their courtship, standing in the shadow of the church after Sunday service, Catherine felt as though her soul had found its home. "I love you," Warren whispered against her hair. "I think I loved you from the moment I pulled you from that river." "I love you too," Catherine said, and knew with absolute certainty that it was true. Warren proposed in August on a hilltop overlooking the Niobrara River. They had ridden out together after Catherine finished teaching for the day, and Warren had spread a blanket for them to sit and watch the sunset. Catherine had been content just to be near him, to feel his solid presence beside her, when Warren suddenly took her hand. "Catherine Grace, I know I don't have much to offer yet, but I swear I will spend every day of my life working to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Catherine threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, Warren, yes." He produced a simple gold band from his pocket, and Catherine recognized it as his mother's ring, the one Warren had told her about in one of their long conversations. The fact that he was giving her something so precious made tears stream down her face. "It fits perfectly," she said, watching the gold catch the dying light. "Like you and me," Warren said, and kissed her deeply. They married in September in Valentine's small church with the whole town in attendance. Catherine wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Foster helped her sew, and Warren wore his Sunday best with his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a shine. Reverend Samuel Peterson performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Warren kissed Catherine with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The town threw a celebration afterward with music and dancing and more food than Catherine had seen in months. She danced with Warren under the stars, his arms strong around her, and felt happier than she had ever been in her life. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house since Warren wanted Catherine's first visit to the homestead to be in daylight. He was gentle and patient with her, making their first union something beautiful rather than frightening. Catherine fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling cherished and complete. The next morning, Warren took Catherine to see the homestead that would now be her home. They rode together on Juniper with Catherine sitting sideways in front of Warren, his arms encircling her. The journey took about 2 hours, following rough trails through grassland and scattered copses of cottonwoods. The homestead appeared as they crested a rise, and Catherine's first reaction was one of dismay. The house was barely more than a cabin, one room with a loft, the wood weathered and gray. The barn leaned slightly to one side. The corral fence needed mending. Everything looked worn and tired. Warren felt her stiffen in his arms. "I know it's not much," he said quietly, "but I'll make it better, Catherine, I promise you." Catherine turned in the saddle to look at her husband's face, saw the worry and hope there, and felt her heart swell. This man had saved her life, had courted her with respect and tenderness, had given her his mother's ring and his whole heart. What did a rough cabin matter compared to that? "It's perfect," she said firmly. "It's ours, and that makes it perfect." Relief flooded Warren's features. He kissed her soundly and urged Juniper forward. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. Warren had obviously tried to make it presentable, sweeping the floors and stocking the shelves with basic supplies. There was a stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a bed frame with a corn husk mattress in one corner. A ladder led up to the loft where Warren stored his extra gear. "We'll build a proper bedroom," Warren said, setting their bags down. "And a real kitchen. Maybe even add a second room for children someday if we're blessed with them." Catherine explored her new home, running her hands over surfaces, peering into the sparse pantry, imagining how she could make this place truly theirs. She found curtain fabric in one of her bags, a gift from Mrs. Foster, and immediately began planning where to hang them. Over the following weeks, Catherine and Warren settled into married life. Catherine continued teaching, riding into Valentine 3 days a week on the sorrel mare Warren had given her, whom she had named Clementine. Warren worked the land and the small herd of cattle he was building, and took occasional jobs for neighboring ranches when cash was needed. They worked together to improve the homestead. Warren built Catherine a proper kitchen area with a good stove he bought from a family leaving the territory. Catherine planted a vegetable garden and sewed curtains and a quilt for their bed. They reinforced the barn and mended the corral fence together, Catherine holding boards while Warren hammered. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about their days. Warren would tell her about the cattle or share plans for expanding the herd. Catherine would describe her students' progress and the amusing things children said. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Warren whittling or repairing tack while Catherine sewed or prepared lessons. Their physical relationship deepened as Catherine's initial shyness faded. Warren was always gentle, always attentive to her needs and comfort, and Catherine discovered that marriage held pleasures she had never imagined. She loved the way Warren looked at her when he thought she was not watching, the way his hands touched her with reverence, the way he whispered her name in the darkness. Winter came early and hard that year. Snow fell in November and kept falling, blanketing the Nebraska plains in white. Warren worked tirelessly to keep the cattle alive, breaking ice on the water supply every morning, ensuring they had enough hay to see them through. Catherine worried about him when he was out in the cold, and she took to heating bricks by the fire to warm their bed before he returned each evening. The school closed for several weeks when the weather became too dangerous for travel. Catherine stayed home at the homestead, cooking and cleaning and trying not to feel too isolated. Warren was her constant companion during those weeks, and she was grateful for his steady presence. They talked for hours, played cards, read aloud to each other from the few books they owned. Catherine learned that her husband had a surprising talent for storytelling and could make her laugh until her sides ached with his tall tales. One evening in late December, as a blizzard howled outside and they huddled close to the fire, Warren pulled Catherine into his lap and held her tight. "This is what I dreamed about," he said quietly. "When I was working ranches down in Texas, sleeping under the stars with nothing but my bedroll and juniper, I used to dream about having a home and a wife to share it with, someone to weather the storms with, literally and figuratively." Catherine kissed his cheek. "I used to dream about finding someone who made me feel safe and cherished, someone who looked at me like I was precious. You're everything I hoped for, Warren. Even living in a drafty cabin in the middle of nowhere, especially then." Catherine snuggled closer. "Though I wouldn't mind if you made good on that promise to expand the house." Warren laughed. "Come spring, I swear it. We'll add a proper bedroom and maybe even a second room. I've been saving money, and I think I can swing it if I take on some extra work." Catherine was about to respond when a wave of dizziness washed over her. She had been feeling strange for several days now, queasy in the mornings, tired in the afternoons. She had attributed it to the heavy food they had been eating and the lack of fresh air, but now a different possibility occurred to her. "Warren," she said slowly, "I think I might be with child." Warren went very still beneath her. "Truly, I'm not certain yet, but the signs are there. We'll know for sure in another week or two." Warren lifted her face to his, and Catherine saw wonder and joy blazing in his gray eyes. "A baby! Catherine, we're going to have a baby!" She laughed at his excitement, at the way he immediately placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "We might be. Don't get too excited yet." But Warren was already excited, already planning. He insisted Catherine rest more, take on fewer chores. He fussed over her diet and whether the cabin was warm enough. Catherine found his concern endearing, even when it became slightly overwhelming. By January, there was no doubt. Catherine was definitely pregnant and due sometime in late summer. Warren was beside himself with happiness. He rode into Valentine and returned with supplies, including yarn so Catherine could knit baby clothes, and a book about pregnancy and childbirth that he had ordered special from a catalog. Catherine continued teaching as long as she could, though she had to tell the school board about her condition. Some members were concerned about a pregnant woman teaching impressionable young minds, but Catherine's students and their parents rallied around her. By April, though, Catherine's growing belly made the long rides uncomfortable, and she reluctantly gave up teaching until after the baby came. She spent the late spring and early summer preparing for their child's arrival. Warren built a cradle from smooth pine, and Catherine lined it with soft blankets. They transformed a corner of the cabin into a nursery area, hanging a curtain for privacy. Catherine sewed tiny gowns and knitted booties, marveling at how small everything was. Warren started the expansion on the house, working before dawn and after dusk to add the promised bedroom. Neighbors came to help raise the walls and add the roof, and Catherine fed them all from her improved kitchen, grateful for the community they had built. The baby came on a sweltering August night, arriving 2 weeks early and causing Warren to panic. He rode at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor from Valentine, while Mrs. Foster, who had been staying with them for the final weeks of Catherine's pregnancy, helped Catherine through the early stages of labor. Dr. Henry Morrison arrived just in time. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Catherine thought she could not endure another minute of pain. But Warren held her hand and whispered encouragement, and Mrs. Foster wiped her brow with cool cloths, and finally, as dawn broke over the Nebraska plains, Catherine heard her baby cry. "It's a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Warren laughed and cried at the same time as the doctor placed their son in Catherine's arms. She looked down at the red-faced, angry little creature and felt her heart expand to accommodate a love she had not known was possible. "He's perfect," she breathed. "What will you name him, Mrs. Foster asked. Catherine looked at Warren. They had discussed names for weeks but never quite decided. Now, holding their son, Catherine suddenly knew. "William," she said. "William Foster Cole." Warren nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "William, it's perfect." Baby William was a loud, demanding infant who kept his parents exhausted for the first several months. Catherine had thought she understood what tired meant, but she discovered she had known nothing until she experienced the bone-deep weariness of caring for a newborn. Warren helped as much as he could, walking the floor with William when he fussed, changing soiled nappies without complaint, bringing Catherine whatever she needed while she nursed. They were both completely besotted with their son. Warren would spend hours just watching William sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Catherine found joy in every milestone, every smile, every small development, As William grew from an infant into a chubby, cheerful baby, Catherine gradually returned to teaching. She brought William with her to school, and the students adored having a baby in the classroom. The older girls helped watch him while Catherine taught, and William became something of a mascot for the Valentine school. Life settled into a new rhythm. Warren's cattle business slowly grew more profitable, and he began earning a reputation as an honest dealer. The homestead expanded further, gaining a proper barn and additional corrals. Catherine's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and surplus to sell in town. They had been married 3 years when Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a shock, though no less joyful. William was 2 years old, walking and talking and getting into everything, when his sister arrived the following spring. "A girl this time, Doctor," Morrison said, handing Warren the baby, beautiful as her mother. Warren cradled his daughter with practiced ease, and Catherine watched her husband fall in love all over again. They named her Rose Marie Cole, and she was everything her brother was not, quiet and watchful and content. The years passed in a blur of children and cattle and crops. Catherine taught when she could, eventually becoming a permanent fixture at the new schoolhouse the town finally built when William was 4. Warren's herd grew until he needed to hire help during roundups and drives. They added more rooms to the house until it was a proper home, with real glass windows and wood floors and separate bedrooms for the children. 2 more babies followed Rose, another boy named Thomas and a girl named Elizabeth. The house filled with noise and laughter and occasional tears. Catherine sometimes felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work involved in raising 4 children and helping run a ranch, but she never regretted any of it. This was the life she had chosen, the family she and Warren had built together. Warren remained the steady, loving man she had fallen in love with by a riverbank at dusk. He was patient with the children, teaching them to ride and rope and care for animals. He was attentive to Catherine, still looking at her with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding night. They still talked for hours in the evenings after the children were asleep, still reached for each other in the darkness. "You remember the day we met?" Catherine asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sun set. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Every detail," Warren said, taking her hand. "I remember seeing you in that river with the wolves closing in, and I remember thinking I had never moved faster in my life. I remember how you looked soaked and shivering by my fire, so brave despite everything that had happened. I remember thinking you were the most capable man I had ever seen," Catherine said. "The way you shot those wolves without hesitation, the way you took care of me afterward. I felt safe with you from that very first moment." Warren squeezed her hand. "I'm grateful every day that I was in the right place at the right time. I can't imagine my life without you, Catherine. You and the children, you're everything to me." "We're lucky," Catherine agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "So many things could have gone differently that day, but they didn't, and we found each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. William was teaching Rose how to lasso a fence post, while Thomas and Elizabeth played with a litter of barn kittens. The Nebraska sky burned copper and gold as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting everything in warm light. Catherine thought about the frightened young woman she had been, running from wolves at dusk, plunging into a river in desperation. She thought about the lonely homestead that had seemed so rough on her wedding day. She thought about all the hard work and sleepless nights, the worries and struggles that came with frontier life. And she thought about Warren, her steady cowboy who had saved her life, and then given her a life worth saving. She thought about their children, their home, the community they had built in Valentine. She thought about all the ordinary miracles that made up their days. "I love you," she said simply. Warren turned and kissed her, gentle and sweet. "I love you too, always." As the children's laughter rang out across the homestead and the sun dipped below the horizon, Catherine felt a profound sense of contentment. This was her life now, filled with purpose and love and family. She had been chased into a river by wolves at dusk, and a cowboy had shot everyone and pulled her ashore. But Warren had done more than save her life that evening. He had given her a home, a family, a future filled with hope. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. William grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the cattle business as much as his father did. Rose became a skilled rider and helped train horses for neighboring ranches. Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers and talked about becoming a banker someday. Elizabeth, the baby, surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Catherine and Warren grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces lined by sun and laughter. But the love between them never dimmed. They still talked for hours, still reached for each other in the night, still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt as young newlyweds. The homestead became one of the most prosperous ranches in the Valentine area. Warren's reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle spread throughout Nebraska and beyond. Catherine returned to full-time teaching once the children were grown, becoming a beloved fixture in Valentine's educational community. She taught 3 generations of children over her career, including eventually her own grandchildren. When William married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, Catherine and Warren celebrated the expansion of their family. Grandchildren followed, loud and energetic, filling the house with new life. Rose married a horse trainer and stayed close, living just 5 miles down the road. Thomas did indeed become a banker, though he chose to stay in Valentine rather than seeking opportunities in larger cities. Elizabeth became a teacher and eventually took over Catherine's position when she finally retired. As they entered their later years, Catherine and Warren spent more time on the porch watching sunsets and less time working the ranch, though Warren could never fully retire. He was happiest on horseback, checking his cattle, even when his children and grandchildren insisted he should rest more. One evening, as they sat in their accustomed places watching the sky turn gold, Warren took Catherine's hand just as he had 1,000 times before. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Catherine looked at her husband, at the face she had loved for over 40 years, and smiled. "Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner. But then, maybe we needed to go through everything we did to become the people who could build this life together." Catherine nodded, thinking of all the losses they had both suffered before that fateful evening by the river. Her parents, her aunt, his mother and father. All the pain and loneliness that had shaped them into people capable of appreciating what they found in each other. "We were meant to find each other," she said. "I believe that with my whole heart." Warren lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "So do I." They sat together as the sun set over the Nebraska plains. 2 people who had found each other in the most dramatic circumstances and built a life together through hard work, dedication, and unwavering love. The wolves had long since faded into memory, becoming just another story to tell the grandchildren. But what had come after, the life they had created together, that was the real story. That was what mattered. Catherine leaned against Warren's shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to the familiar sounds of their ranch, their family, their home. She thought about the schoolgirl who had come to Valentine seeking a fresh start, who had nearly died in a river at dusk. She thought about the cowboy who had saved her with his rifle and his steady hands, who had given her his coat and his heart. And she gave thanks for every moment of the life they had shared, every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated, every ordinary day that had added up to an extraordinary love story. As darkness fell over the Valentine homestead and stars began appearing in the vast Nebraska sky, Catherine and Warren remained on their porch, hand in hand, together as they had been since that pivotal evening when wolves and river and destiny had brought them together. Their love had weathered every storm, grown stronger with every passing year, and would endure until their final days. It was, Catherine thought as sleep began to claim her there on the porch with Warren's arm around her shoulders, the very best kind of happily ever after. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and absolutely worth every moment. And as Warren pressed a kiss to her silver hair and murmured, "I love you," one more time, Catherine smiled and whispered back, "Always," knowing that their love story, which had begun with such drama and danger, had transformed into something even more remarkable, a lifetime partnership built on respect, affection, and a commitment that had never wavered. Their children and grandchildren would tell the story for generations, about how Grandma Catherine had been chased into the river by wolves at dusk, and how Grandpa Warren had shot everyone and pulled her ashore. But those who knew them best understood that the real story was not about the dramatic rescue, but about everything that came after. The years of hard work building a homestead into a ranch, the children raised with love and discipline, the community built through generosity and integrity, and most of all, the quiet, steady love that had sustained them both through every season of their long lives together. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Catherine and Warren finally rose from their porch and made their way inside to the home they had built together, to the bed they had shared for over 4 decades, to another night of rest before another day of living the life they had created. And in the morning, they would wake together as they always did, grateful for another day, another chance to love each other, another opportunity to appreciate the magnificent gift that had grown from one dramatic evening when a cowboy's aim had been true, and his heart had been open enough to recognize his future in a bedraggled young woman pulled from a river at dusk.